My name is Cindy Booth, and I'm Director at Child Advocates in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have a great need right now for CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate volunteers, to represent the best interest of the many children who are coming into court because of abuse and neglect. Thank you so much for taking the time to view this important video, Undoing Racism. At Child Advocates, we look at disproportionality and undoing racism as an essential part of our best interest advocacy on behalf of children.
Racism is referred to as America's original sin. From the brutality of slavery to the dehumanization of Jim Crow and the current race tensions in America, finding a resolution for racism appears to be as far out of reach as ever before. It is in our court systems where the issue of race has been fought over and defined for decades. Despite these landmark rulings in favor of exterminating racism, the issue still exists. The long-standing problem of race causes us all to question, is it even possible to fix the problem of race and to finally have people of all races live in harmony? Is America forever destined to be mired by the racial divide?
It's deep-rooted. I don't know how you go back and change history.
Racism, I feel like it's always going to be there, but I feel like it could get better though.
Secretly, behind closed doors, racism is always going to be there.
I think, racism has a long way to go before it's completely gone. I don't know if it'll ever be gone.
People don't understand what racism is, then it's not going to go anywhere.
I believe that we were founded on race and on racism. I think that there are things that can be done to improve some factors, and I think that undoing racism is a start for that. However, can it be undone? No.
I think the most important thing is to start a conversation, start a dialogue, to recognize what racism is and how it affects people, and from there we can start to come up with a cure or solution.
Perhaps the issue of racism hasn't been resolved because racism itself is not fully understood. Perhaps we have all been misled to see racism as an issue of prejudice rather than an issue of privilege. If the true nature and origin of racism can be fully understood, there is a chance to undo racism. Over the years, there have been many movements in the fight against racism and the demand of equality for all. The work being done in these movements has come largely from grassroots efforts. Child Advocates of Marion County realized how institutional racism was affecting African American families in the juvenile court system. They saw the disproportionality in the numbers of African American children in the juvenile court system in relation to the African American population of Marion County. While searching for an understanding of race and racism and how it affects the child welfare system, Child Advocates found itself on the front lines of the grassroots efforts against racism in Indianapolis.
My name is Cindy Booth. I'm Executive Director here at Child Advocates, the CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate Agency in Indianapolis, Indiana. Our mission is to represent the best interest of abused and neglected children who've been removed from their caregivers here in Indianapolis.
You've heard the term Child Advocate Volunteer. You've probably heard of the term CASA, which is Court-Appointed Special Advocate. You've even heard the term Guardian Ad Litem. All of those terms are interchangeable as they all represent the voice of the child.
Our purpose, our mission is incredible. The kids are amazing, and it is empowering, and I feel like these issues are going to exist whether or not I'm helping with them. And although it's overwhelming at times because of the incredible hard work that's done here, it feels really good to be a part of the solution.
Every child in Marion County receives their guardian ad litem immediately upon the filing of a case. That's huge for these kids because their world has just been blown up. Everything that they are familiar with, things that they know, is gone. And during the course of a case, it's not unusual for a child to have 5 to 7 caseworkers because there's such turnover. They may have different issues with their parents, but the one constant in that child's life is their guardian ad litem. Were it not for Child Advocates and that guardian ad litem, the child's voice in court would be lost. We could not do this work without them.
As a lawyer, I'm very concerned about the legal system being fair and equitable to everyone. In my world of child welfare, that means looking at what happens to children as they enter the child welfare system. So race and racism become important topics for us to explore and understand if we want our system to be fair and equitable to everyone. I became aware of disproportionality in the child welfare system probably from the very beginning. I started at Child Advocates in 1994 as an attorney and became director in 1996. And as Judge Moore says, one only has to look around the waiting room at our court to understand how race plays a part in our child welfare system and in our juvenile justice system.
The Marion County Juvenile Court is a model court with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And the National Council knows, as do all of us in this work, that there's a huge disproportionate impact on communities of color in this system. The National Council challenged all of us to commence a program called Courts Catalyzing Change to address and have very honest conversations about the issue of race, and because it was believed, and I believe, that until we have honest conversations about race, we're not going to move the needle very far on this disproportionality.
We started to look at, here at Child Advocates, what was our responsibility? If we say we're the voice of children in Indianapolis, what's our responsibility in looking at issues of race and racism? I remember clearly going to a meeting of our Courts Catalyzing Change, part of our model court project, and I had done some demographic searches for the children that we represented. And in 1 month, in just 1 month, 70% of the children who came into the system new as our child in need of services cases were African American. And I was astonished by that. So I went to this meeting and I announced it to a few people, and I was surprised, so surprised by the response I got. Part of the response was people saying, well, that's probably true, so there wasn't anything they hadn't heard or thought of. But the other part was that nobody else was tracking what we were looking at in terms of demographics. And so I went back to Greg Ellis, our director of juvenile court program, and said, you know, we've got to agree. I think the two of us are going to be the ones to push this, and if we are going to examine race and racism, not only on behalf of Child Advocates as an agency, but for the children we represent, I think it's going to be up to us.
I was born and raised in Indiana, so Indiana's history of racism has always run deep, and with this policies and practices, it was the only thing to do was to address it in a head-on way.
As we began our look at disproportionality, I talked to people at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, National CASA, Casey Family Programs. I kept hearing about this group called the People's Institute. And so I did a little bit of research and sent some folks to summits around our state. We went to the Michigan State Summit on Disproportionality, Indiana's. I sent someone to Washington State's Summit on Disproportionality, and they too, it was Andrea Manning Dudley, she too came back and said, I hear about this Undoing Racism workshop.
The core of the excitement and wanting to talk about it some more with Cindy and Greg was just the fact that I felt like being in this field and working with the population that we work with, which are children, mainly African American children, was a piece that service providers, DCS, our people who are working with these children needed to know.
Pieces kind of fell into place after that. Also, because Cindy was so enthused by what Andrea brought back, you know, it was just doubly gratifying to know that, you know, we had a foundation to bring it here and just to see what it was going to be about.
And that was really when I started looking at disproportionality beyond an intellectual exercise. but looking at how it affected individual children that we represent. And so I looked up the website and contacted Diana Dunn and said, I want to do this Undoing Racism workshop here in Indianapolis. And that's how I heard about it. It was through people saying, I've been through this workshop, it's valuable, it taught me things, it made me aware of things about race that I'd never thought of. And so from there, both with national organizations telling me that it was a good group to go with and individuals, that's how I came to Diana's door.
The People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, located in New Orleans, Louisiana, was founded in 1980 by longtime community organizers Ronald Chisholm of New Orleans and Dr. Jim Dunn of Yellow Springs, Ohio. The People's Institute has impacted the lives of nearly 500,000 people, both nationally and internationally. Through this process, it supports groups of anti-racist organizers who build leadership and accountability in the communities where they are organizing. Today, the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond is recognized as one of the leading anti-racism training and organizing institutions in the nation. Their work is based on the premise that racism has been consciously and systematically erected, and it can be undone if people understand where it comes from, how it functions, and why it is perpetuated. The Undoing Racism workshops have been credited with providing new perspective and a working agenda for addressing our age-old problem of racism in America.
My name is Diana Dunn, and I've been with the People's Institute since it was an idea in Jim Dunn, Dr. Jim Dunn's head. He's one of the co-founders of the People's Institute with Ron Chisholm.
My name is Ronald Chisholm. I'm the Executive Director of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, and I'm also the co-founder along with Dr. Jim Dunn. Jim Dunn is passed. It's been over 20-some years he died, and but I still look at him for direction and mentoring. Been doing this work for over 35 years, and the main thing that we do what we call Undoing Racism trainings. And we do that in the context of community organizing. The reason why I think this is so important, because many people are trying to make substantial changes, but many times because we don't understand how racism plays into our work, we'll wind up doing disorganizing in the name of organizing. So we're going to be an effective social change agent. We must discuss racism, talk about it up front, and have a clear understanding of what that means and what it's about.
My first husband was white, and I have a white child with my first husband. My second husband was Jim Dunn, and I have a black child with Jim Dunn. I have, even though those children got in me the same way, spent the same 9 months in me, came out of me the same way, I have seen every institution in this country treat my two children differently. I know that racism is alive and well in the United States in every institution. I also say that I am a widow, and a widow because of racism in the healthcare institution. Racial disparities means that if you are black, you will live sicker and die younger, and Jim died way, way too young. When he was finally diagnosed, we decided to move the People's Institute from Yellow Springs, Ohio, down to New Orleans, Louisiana, where Ron Chisholm was.
The development of the curriculum started after Jim and Dunn and I kept meeting for about a year. And then we started meeting, we made a commitment to start this training institute. And Jim Dunn and I, we met in New York. We would spend extra days going to Brooklyn, where we had a friend of ours had a home, and we would spend 2 extra days trial and error, putting concepts together, putting ideas together, writing things on newsprint, strategizing, challenging each other, pushing each other, agreeing with each other, disagreeing with each other. And after the first couple of years, putting a rough draft of a curriculum together, and we tried it out, but we knew some things had to be tighter. That's when we realized we needed more help to make this happen. So we started inviting people to be a part of this training, and we took our time observing people, selecting people, and the people that we got involved with as far as trainers were all involved in the community. Anybody who's a part of the Institute has to be doing some work to make a difference.
One of the major stumbling blocks in the beginning was that African Americans or black people did not believe that Jim and Ron should be working with white people. And many of them backed away from them because they felt that if you're going to change racism, institutional racism, you need white people in that movement. So they wouldn't back off of that point. And so they would bring white people into every workshop. As a matter of fact, most of the workshops were mostly white people. And I would say even probably till today, most of them are white people. But they decided to work with white people, and they, as I say, they knew it was important to have white people in this movement.
Jim Dunn and I knew we had something that was very powerful, that it could really make a difference, is that when people who were doing organizing would come to our workshop and we could see light bulbs going in their head, and when we would start getting statements in the workshop, this was early, that this training changed my life. And you know, somebody say something changed your life, you really got to think, what does that really mean? And then what really got us was that when African American organizers of all ages, from 70, 80, 90 years of age to 21, they said they wished they would have had this analysis when they first started doing their organizing.
I'm Tiffany Eugene. I am the Administrative Director here at the People's Institute. I've been around since its inception, being that I am the daughter of co-founder and Executive Director Ron. So the Institute has played a major part of my upbringing. I think it's important that we address racism because it's dehumanizing, and people don't realize the value of their worth because they think because of the color of their skin that they're less than. So unless we address that and let people know that, hey, it's not about the color of your skin, it's about you and what you entail.
We live in a country that is based on the idea and the imposition of the ideology of race itself. So we really want to not run away from racism, but understand what race has to do with it. Because when you look at every indicator of quality of life, we as African Americans and other people of color are on the bottom, be it health care, be it employment, be it housing, be it longevity, be it infant mortality, be it any indicator of quality of life, we're at the bottom. And so we want to understand what race has to do with that. You know, I often say in a workshop, quoting Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, that if you take the letters that we use to spell the word America and you scramble those letters up, you will get the phrase, I am race. We are a nation built on the ideology of race. So one of our principles is understanding that.
Of course, the one is that where people finally get a definition, a working definition, race, prejudice plus power. People get blown away because now, when they define racism, they got 30 definitions. But the so importance of having a common language, which means you can have a great discussion because everybody's on the same page.
Understanding what the concept of race has done to all of our humanity, bar none. That many people will talk about racism in terms of what it does to hurt people of color. We believe if racism is dehumanizing, if the concept of race itself and then the implications thereof, racism, if they are dehumanizing, if everyone is a human being, then the concept of race and racism dehumanize us all.
Another thing that's exciting to people when they see how we lay out the manifestations of racism, individual, institutional, cultural, linguistic, and because all these things, that has to do with an ideology, imposition, and a structure. That's what keeps racism in place. That's very revealing to a lot of people.
The Institute knows that if we do not understand racism, that the outcomes of the institutions will stay the same, that historically and statistically white people do better in every institution. That's the way it will stay if you don't address racism. Once you understand that this country was set up for white people by white people to the exclusion of everyone else, that's racism. So who benefits are white people. So in those institutions, if we do not address racism, that will continue to be our outcomes. We will have racial disparities in every system.
If we didn't do this work, I think a lot of people who really want to make a difference would be frustrated. And that we as a people, and I mean people of every sector, of every race, of every every presentation, that our humanity will be even more compromised than it is. We fundamentally believe with everything in us that racism is dehumanizing, that it really is an attack on the human spirit and the human family. And so I think that without doing this work, that we as a human family will be more vulnerable, that we'll be more compromised, and we will have to work in ways that we've really never seen before to try to bring a level of dignity, a level of love, and a level of belief and hope that we can make a difference.
The more I studied history and the more I listened to Jim Dunn and Ron Chisholm and the idea of what racism is, the more I began to believe that change is possible. And that's what motivates me in life. I'm fortunate enough to have lived enough years to have seen what changes have happened to this country because of each and every movement.
There's been a movement in this country. This needs to accelerate the movement. And there are many people now who are tired of what's going on, black, white, Latino, Asian, young people, you know, and they can talk about the Black Lives Matter. You got all kinds of movements going on in this country, but that's just part of a continuation. It's not nothing new. It's just something that everybody is making a difference right now, from our young as well as to our old. And I see intergenerational work is happening as well.
We don't believe in the People's Institute that we are the movement. We believe that there's always been a movement for people working to turn the world right side up. What we want to do is make sure that we're engaged in developing leaders and supporting organizers in an anti-racist way with an anti-racist analysis. Because tied to us in community organizing, you know, we define community organizing as people bringing folks together for an intended purpose to make a difference in shifting power.
I'm saying we have a lot of work to do to deal with racism. I think I wouldn't do it if I didn't think you can undo it. We always say you got to know what has been done to undo it.
I think that deep down inside of each of us, when I talked about the mustard seed, is the ability to have empathy with people that are different than yourself, different economically, different racially, different gender, different sexual orientations, that we really, deep down in the core of us, we want to be able to develop that sense of empathy. And if we can develop that sense of empathy, we understand, I think all of us understand to some core way, that if we help somebody who needs help, that all of us will be better for that.
The Undoing Racism Workshop is a unique blend of group interaction, individual introspection, and information designed to lead the participant into a new approach to defining and understanding race and racism. The first Undoing Racism Workshop included child advocate staff, volunteers, judicial officers from Marion County Juvenile Court, and the people from the Department of Child Services. Today, the workshops are attended by a diverse group of people from both inside and outside the child welfare community. 4 participants allowed us to interview them before, during, and after the workshop to show their individual journeys through the process of understanding the Undoing Racism principles. To honor all participants of the workshop and to protect the integrity of the workshop itself, we did not film with sound during the workshops.
And mostly, when I was growing up, I didn't really even think that race was an issue because I didn't see people of color around me, and I didn't see them having different experiences with me. And I thought that every student in America went to a nice, quaint little school in a nice little farming community and didn't have issues with race. I thought everyone lived the life that I did.
Racism is a lot of fear, a lot of unknown, a lot of ignorance, and believing that this group of people, you know, they could be here to take away from my community, or they could be dangerous, or, you know, they're uneducated based off of what they see. There's a lot of ignorance and a lot of unknown in regards to racism and hatred.
Well, as I grew up in a very homogenous community, and I would say that racism was alive but kind of undercover, in the sense that different races lived in Omaha. They lived in the big city, and we weren't around the big city. The closest different race to where I grew up was a Native American reservation. And so there were Indian kids that played on their sports teams. I wouldn't say there was a lot of talk about that differences, but there were certainly implied differences among the people that I grew up with, that the reservation kids were not the same as us. The races in Omaha were not the same as us. And I pretty much got the feeling that they were not the same, meaning not as good as us. And I grew up with that and didn't really meet a lot of different races till I was in college. And so I didn't have any experience with different people that I personally knew till I was in college.
Being here, I felt like I have experienced some things that maybe I was sheltered from growing up in a small town in southern Indiana like Jeffersonville. I don't know if I was prepared to deal with the poverty that I have seen, pastoring this church. I didn't really see a lot of the disintegration of families growing up in Jeffersonville. Most of the kids came from two-parent homes. Coming to this parish and being in this neighborhood, it was shocking that 8 out of 10 children were growing up in a single-parent household.
As the workshop gets closer, I'm feeling excited to broaden my horizons, definitely. I'm also a little nervous to say the wrong thing or to recognize things in myself that I might not want to see. But they need to be seen and they need to be worked with if I want to make any change in this world.
Honestly, I'm tired of talking about race. I wish it did not exist. I wish it was not a factor, because it is the root of a lot of evil and things that happen just within the world. So it's something that I wish that we did not have to talk about, but I understand that it's necessary and it's very important and vital, especially with things that are going on currently, with police brutality and just with crime within Indianapolis itself. It's a conversation that has to happen, and it's education that's very valuable and important. So even though I'm not excited to continue to talk about race, I am anticipating learning more and being able to have a different perspective and understanding.
First of all, I'm very excited to be able to take it. I think that there's not that opportunity for everyone to take it. I am also very scared. I'm very scared that I am going to find out something about myself that I don't know. That's important to me to be able to find it out so I can make the changes. I hope that I am not a racist. I hope I haven't done things that are incorrect. But I think this class is going to tell me that.
I think what's piquing my interest about the workshop is certainly to learn and to have that dialogue about it. It's always interesting to hear different people's perspective on it, and maybe it may give me some fresh eyes to look at what I have perceived to be racism from a different perspective. So certainly I will bring my experience into this workshop, but I'm open to hearing what really has to be said, and maybe that will either change my perspective on it or reaffirm what I have been feeling internally.
Day one of the workshop is an important beginning to approaching race and racism with the People's Institute principles. Participants sit in a circle and start the day going around the room, introducing themselves. Key topics discussed on day one are understanding poverty's role in our communities and defining power in communities. Day one also establishes a common definition of race and racism.
There is a feeling of curiosity, of wanting to seek more knowledge, especially regarding the history around the way the hierarchy of races were developed in the first place.
Well, what really shocked me was learning about the arbitrary racial classifications that were come up with to justify white supremacy, basically, and European supremacy, and how these these categories just kind of were based on very arbitrary notions like physical appearance, and how they were used to justify oppression on a global scale.
The box that I am sometimes shapes how I think about particularly dealing with poor people. And certainly as a pastor that has a church in the urban core and the work I do with 10-Point Coalition, I think I go into it with some already preconceived biases that tend to shape how I deal with the clientele that I either minister to as a pastor or deal with on the streets as 10-Point. And I never, thought about it in that way. And the question I was kind of asking myself, am I really hearing them, or are my own preconceived ideas getting in the way of me really hearing their story?
So in my former job, I worked for the city and worked with a lot with zoning and land use, and have seen where things that happen through zoning happen differently to neighborhoods of color or neighborhoods of low income than they do to neighborhoods that are white or neighborhoods that are higher income. That was often brought up today as people were brainstorming. Some of the things that people said were about zoning and industry goes into low income neighborhoods. Was all historically true. And our city, just like most cities, are still dealing with that issue today. And I don't know that there's an easy solution, but it's something that planners and people like me continually need to work on.
Day 2 begins with a very important check-in with all participants on how the first day resonated with them. The morning of Day 2 moves around the circle as each participant shares their thoughts and feelings about the content delivered on Day 1. Day 2 moves on to the role history and our laws play in racism. Participants get an understanding of institutional racism, internalized racial inferiority and superiority, with activities designed to provoke thought on race identity and power.
Today's session was really good, particularly dealing with the internalized racial inferiority. I really see that playing itself out in a lot of different ways in the community. And it really gave me some context as to what's going on, particularly someone in my position who tends to be on television a lot addressing some of the community issues. And I've always been wondering, why am I getting so much pushback in the black community, particularly with some elected officials and preachers?
For about the last hour, Tyrone's been talking about the black experience, and I realize that is totally different from anything I've ever experienced or even heard that much about, only speculated about. I realize that no matter if I believe I had white privilege or not, my life has been different, and different in just dramatic ways, and I'm just dealing with that inside, just continually trying to determine how this will impact my life in the future, my job, things like that.
So how do we do this? How do we undo racism? How do we bring this conversation into our homes and our communities? And because I have the same question, and I really like the answer that we got, which is we're doing it right now, everything that we're talking about right now. And there is no A to B, like 1, 2, 3 steps to follow. You have to identify your own community and identify your community's own needs to create those conversations. So we're looking for a formula that's not there. We have to come up with it ourselves.
One of the ideas that I could probably take away and utilize moving forward is the idea of the gatekeepers, and understanding that when you are at the forefront of any organization that represents or serves a group of people, that you have to be mindful of your actions and the things that you're involved with to make sure that you're consistently checking with your constituency to make sure that the mission and the policy is actually there to help and to protect, and to also make sure you're looking at ways to leverage the assets that are already in the community.
One of the things I said in my initial interview, that I was afraid of finding out that I was discriminatory or doing things that were discriminatory. So I find out through the whole workshop that really just by being white is racism. And I believe it. I believe it's true. The history that was told to me today, you know some of it, but certainly not in the detail that was talked about today. Very disturbing that did happen. Part of my thought was, oh, well, did someone try to stop that from happening? Well, it doesn't really matter. It happened.
In the room, you know, you kind of got a sense of the challenges that we face in this country and really trying to undo racism. So unless we are talking and you know, really dealing with the systems that are creating the racism, you know, it's going to be a challenge. But I certainly am leaving today hopeful because I do believe that this is something that we can undo in this country, and I'm hopeful for my children and my children's children.
Several weeks after attending the Undoing Racism workshop, we met up with our 4 attendees. We wanted to get their thoughts on the workshop after they had some time to get back in their routines and reflect on their experiences.
Since the workshop, my reflections looking back and my experience coming forward out of the workshop have been less of a focus on individual acts of racism and discrimination, and more so understanding that our entire culture and society is built on racism. And it's almost disheartening to think that it's not individual actions and individual viewpoints that are going to fix racism, but that it's also going to have to be a collective effort on everybody's part. So it's encouraging, but it's also discouraging because I know that I can't fix it myself, you know?
My overall opinion and sort of reflection on the workshop is that it was productive. There was lots of good information that that we received, and it helped us really kind of go back to our offices and into our individual work and sort of analyze what it is that we're doing and how we can make sure that we are being the gatekeepers and that we are taking care of the people who live in our community and supporting them and not being a part of any institutional racism, and helping to sort of undo those barriers to break them down as we can.
You know, as we particularly deal with young people today and trying to understand their thinking and why there's so much hopelessness out here in the streets among particularly young African Americans between 14 and 24 years old, and then even those who are older that are just caught up in the cycle. So I think that really helped me understand the work that I do both as a pastor and as a leader of a faith-based organization that addresses youth violence.
Much more aware of the media kind of issues related to racism. Yeah. Even today, I read something about racist emails by a policeman in San Francisco. And I probably would have, in the past, just read the title. Now I read the whole article, and things like that are beginning to make me more angry, probably, than when I went before, because I'm a lot more understanding of what racism is all about.
What role that I can play, you know, in helping to undo racism in the position I am in as a pastor and a leader of the community. So certainly I'm encouraging people to take this workshop, because I think you will really be blessed by taking and being a part of this Undo Racism workshop. I think it'll change your life.
Since 2010, the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond has presented 46 Undoing Racism workshops at child advocates' offices with 1,800 attendees. Many of the attendees have powerful aha moments after experiencing the 2-day workshop on undoing racism. They are learning why there is such resistance to changing systems and perceptions on racism in America.
One of the things that Ron and Diana bring to this is that they came from community organizing with Saul Alinsky, and they saw that the way that they were being taught how to do community organizing did not take in the factor of race. And so that's what they infused it with. And I think that's often true. We teach, community organizing, but we talk about racism over here, and we talk about community organizing over there, and you don't get the full picture, right? And I'll be among my colleagues who are black, and we'll talk about racism together, but sometimes we're not talking with white folks, so you don't get the whole picture. And Undoing Racism gives you that.
Well, I really did not have a good feel for U.S. history and how that created institutions that were racially insensitive. And if nobody changes the institutions over time, racism is just going to keep floating right along. So that was a biggie. A second one for me was helping me get a better understanding of white privilege. And I sort of understood white privilege, and I'm not offended by understanding that I've benefited from that. I mean, I was born here, and so there's no blame involved, but it never really sank into me how profoundly advantaged I was to be born as a white person. I don't have to worry about a lot of things that people of color have to worry about. I don't have to worry about being followed in the store. I don't have to worry about being stopped unjustly, and many other indignities that people experience. I don't have to worry about any of that.
We focus so much on dividing us as people, and just how it starts with language and the definition of what black is versus what white is, and everything good associated is with white and everything negative is associated with black.
Really thought about a number of different things over the last 2 days. Probably one of the biggest aha moments for me is that as we talked about racism and the definition of racism, that it really has to involve power. And so I really believe that anyone could be racist before coming into this workshop, and have been challenged by the definition of really only those in power, also known as white people in our society, can be racist. That's a very hard concept. It's hard to get my head around. It's hard to know as a white woman that I hold that responsibility, that I hold the responsibility for helping to change that.
First aha moment for me was when we go through the process of asking the question, what do you like about being white, black, whatever? And white people say they never thought about it. They never thought about being white was my first aha moment, because when I first heard it, I thought they were lying. I said, why are they lying about this? I know they've thought about being white, because people of color think about being people of color all the time. Black person thinks about being black all the time in this society. So to hear a white person say they've never thought about it blew my mind. But then after going through maybe about the 5th training, I realized, damn, every white person says the same thing. They really never think about it.
As an educator, I know that I'm a gatekeeper to a lot of resources, and I can be part of the solution. I can be part of the problem, or I could do the really easy thing and ignore it all, which would be easier than having all the knowledge that I have now. But I also feel very empowered that possibly we can make a change.
The biggest thing is that we can organize people to challenge systems instead of, in education we have this strong focus on programming, like programming is the way, programming is how we do it. We add more programs, we can do it that way. But really I think what we overlook is that we have people, we need people, and that's really ultimately all we need. If we can get people to be organized and get people to work together around an idea and say, hey, we can challenge this together, then we can stop talking about how we don't have enough money, how we don't have enough people, how we don't have enough space. We have people, and so that's where we can start. And so we just have been trained to think like we need more than that. And it's amazing to know that we already have what we need, and we all have it inside of us. We just have to be able to step into that and actualize that. And that's kind of scary to think that, man, I've had this the whole time.
One of the most poignant things that I've experienced since the Undoing Racism is one of our African American social workers came to me and said, I thought we would be past this. And that made me so sad that she thought she had worked all her life to eradicate racism, and here we were still talking about how to undo it. On the other hand, she was very hopeful because of our commitment to the Undoing Racism Initiative and our commitment to undo racism.
What's the song? Change gonna come? Yeah, change is gonna come, but it's gonna be slow.
I'm going to add it to the initiatives I'm already doing to have those courageous conversations about racism and maybe looking at the definition of racism differently. And look, if I got thrown back by the definition, and this is something I've researched and wrote a dissertation on, those that have never been exposed to this, they're going to be very thrown back. So it's kind of like making that comfortable for them, to keep it a safe place that, you know, whites, blacks, Latinos, we can all talk about it. So that's really the first step, making those conversations, giving us that environment to be safe.
And I think moving towards anti-racism it has to be deliberate. There has to be thought behind it. It has to be intentional. And it requires uncomfortable conversations. And I have to talk to my other white friends about it and not just keep it to myself.
I've started thinking about what we can do next, what I can do next as an individual, but also what we can do next as a school corporation. And I think it's going to take a while to think about it, but we've already started making plans on what are the next steps. How can we bring this information to more people? So it's a process, and I'm not sure yet, but it certainly is a process and not something that I am willing just to let go.
The Undoing Racism workshops are having a powerful impact on the attendees, bringing greater awareness on how institutional racism plays out in our society and in the child welfare system. The Undoing Racism workshops are moving the needle on the outcome of children and families of color in the Marion County welfare system.
The Undoing Racism workshops affected me powerfully as an individual and as a leader. So when we went through the workshop the first time, it was a very closed group of people. Judge Moores had allowed us to raise the money and hold a first workshop, and it was hearing officers from juvenile court, employees from child advocates, people from the Department of Child Services. And we really didn't know what to expect. I mean, I'd read some things about them and I'd seen some of the activities, but sitting in that circle yourself, it will really affect you. And I heard race and racism talked about in a way that I hadn't ever heard it talked about before. Many people, both black and white, say they've heard history that they've never heard before, and looking at history in a much different way. So as a person, I had specific aha moments as a mother and as a white woman. As a leader, I think after going through the workshop, I was even more committed to continuing to bring them to our staff and to our CASA volunteers and to our community, because I believed it was what we needed to do to make sure we're doing what's right for children in our community. So I now require all of our employees to go through the training.
At this point, there have been so many people that have gone through the Undoing Racism workshop at Child Advocates that it's exciting to know there are people inside the child welfare community and outside of the community, police officers, teachers, judges, that share a common language. And I wish that we could all wear a little button that just said, I've been through Undoing Racism, because that common denominator, that common language, it just shows that we've shared this experience, we're open to these ideas, we can talk to each other, be honest, and that we are looking at our work and at our community in a new way, with a new lens.
Yes, it is making a change. It certainly changed my lens on how I look at each individual case. And I've had all of the judicial officers here at juvenile court participate in one of the seminars, because I believe that it is so impactful and is so important to understanding how we look at what we look at. I believe that it has changed the lenses of the other judicial officers as well. It makes us sensitive to things that we weren't even necessarily aware of.
is absolutely, in my opinion, moving the needle, because this is not just CASA's attending this, court-appointed special advocates. The sessions that I have been to, and I've been to several, have been people from the community, law enforcement, psychologists, service providers, judges, magistrates, people all throughout the child welfare community, and even outside the child welfare community, grassroots organizers, you know, all sorts of people from the community have attended. And so yes, I think it's heightening awareness of this issue in Indianapolis.
It was, in short, it was powerful. It was powerful, it was empowering, it was explosive. There, you know, listen, I'm a 58-year-old black man. I thought I was an expert in all matters with respect to race, specifically as it relates to black men. I was blown away first by my lack of knowledge, secondly by my lack of understanding of fully what it was about. And I became a student, I became a disciple, and I became committed to furthering this work ever since then. So primarily though, through the efforts of Sidney Booth, we've been able to sustain these workshops. So since April 2010, we've hosted these workshops every 3 to 4 months since then. So you just do the math. We've had 3 to 4 workshops per year. We've done this for 6 years. So we are, I like to think we're slow walking this issue down person by person. We continue to have these courageous conversations. We continue to have these discussions surrounding those basic issues.
I began to feel a big commitment to our staff, to our African American staff, to the people of color who work for us, saying, I want to do this on behalf of them. I had seen so many of them have aha moments for themselves. I'd seen them observe white people having aha moments that really meant a lot to them, to be able to talk in a safe place in mixed company about race. And I think as a leader, that made me all the more committed to bringing Undoing Racism to our community.
I believe it's important for people to go through this workshop, the Undoing Racism workshop, to understand families and culture better, not just for understanding the families and children better as far as their culture, but also to understand yourself and your biases that you may have, or anything that you may bring into a family's life that could be seen as racially or culturally suppressing.
The project that brings Undoing Racism to our community is, I think it's really important when I say I'm a voice for a child, I'm a voice for every child. And that means looking at every aspect of that child's life, including race and how racism may have affected that child. Our child welfare system is removing record numbers of children in Indiana. And if there is a way that I can look at decisions that we make here at this agency and reduce the effect of removal, reduce the effect of disproportionality by providing training that has people thinking in a different way about race and racism, then I must do that if I'm a leader here at Child Advocates. I want the community in Indianapolis and beyond to know that it's important to look at race and racism and talk about it in a safe place, thoughtfully, with a common definition and a common language, so that we're not constantly sensationalizing everything that happens has some racial component to it, but we're really thinking about what is the root of this and why are we doing this. So I think it's really important for the community to know that. I want more people to come and volunteer at Child Advocates, and I want them to know everybody is welcome, and we have children who are desperately waiting for someone to speak up on their behalf. I think it's a very important initiative to bring to our community.
The biggest ripple effect that I see in this work and in the workshops is that people are talking about it. It is a discussion that needs to be had, and it is being had. And that is so, so important, because we do what we know, and we talk about things that we have experienced, and we talk about things that have made an impact on us. So when people are talking about undoing racism, we're not going to change anything overnight. I said, but if you continue to do what you know, what you have learned, you talk about it, you talk about to others, then eventually the differences will start to show.
I always like to give us some hope. You know, systemic training and intervention does work to change thinking and reduce disproportionality and disparities. And there's research and evidence of it right here in Indianapolis with the work that Child Advocates has done. Because I and a researcher on my team actually led the research. And we looked at the impact of the Undoing Racism workshop, and we looked at the impact of a shorter workshop that I do, and we found that it makes a difference. And it actually makes a difference for all, while at the same time lifting those who are least likely to have the desired outcomes. And so when we know better, we do better. We hear that all the time. I say it's our business to know better. And that a lot of the times why we don't get to that place where we talk about racism is because it's so difficult to have a conversation about something that has not been normal for us. It's not a common everyday discussion, except, you know, I talk about it with my family all the time. But until we can do that in a cross-racial setting, you know, where we come to understand and have, you know, a common language and definition of racism, where then we can kind of break down the defenses around talking about racism and recognizing that the willingness to do that will get us to that place where we'll realize our vision for why we work and advocate and do whatever we do to try to change outcomes for people that we say we care about.
I look to the wisdom of others, including Judge Moore's statement about the Undoing Racism work. Her statement meant so much to me. She says it changes how we look at what we look at. And, as Ron Chisholm says, if racism was done, it can be undone. And it is my hope that with the work that we're doing at Child Advocates, I as a person, I as a leader am doing my part to undo racism on behalf of the children we represent, on behalf of the staff that we have here at Child Advocates, on behalf of the volunteers who are here at Child Advocates by choice. If it can be done, it can be undone.
Where are we with Jim Dunn's vision, which really attracted me to him and attracted so many of us to him and to Ron Chisholm? I would have to say that I don't think any of us would have believed that we would be where we are today, that we believed in it, and then that belief had to grow each and every year. So I always think about that. What would Jim Dunn think if he was here today? You know, talking about undoing racism and the work that we do, you have to have passion. You can't do it without the passion and without the belief in people, and that's what we learned from him, and that was his vision, that we could continue on that movement.
The training brings hope. When people have been out, come for the first time, like I say, light bulbs going on. For me, that's hope right now. A lot of people come to trainings, don't feel nothing can get done. Some people are doing something because they just want to do it, but don't have a clear direction where they're going out. Their vision is not clear. I think that the hope that we do, the training we do, gives people a long-range vision of hope. And that's another step to making real changes. You know, hope is a major ingredient in your community organizing, in your advocacy work, in your social change work. A lot of folks do advocacy, a lot of folks do social services, a lot of folks do direct mobilization, a lot of people do activist work, but sometimes they do it around the issue. But whatever issue it is, hope has to be in that. So I think for me, it's to preserve the hope. It's so important to keep this going. It gives me hope. You know, that's what keeps me going. That I know I know we can do improve our work. You know, and that's where I'm at in it. You know.
And there's only one song, yeah, I've been sent here to sing. Let me tell you, it ain't about money.
Thank you for viewing Undoing Racism. For more information about becoming a child advocate in your area, or more information about undoing racism, please contact us through our website.
Find the answers if we only take a little time. Yeah, keep your faith.